What about your personal statement? So you get to write this, it's in your hands. What do you need to do? Well, we'll assess it in its own right, as will many other universities, so it is important that you spend time over it. But for us, because we interview about 70% of our applicant field, it's also something that we might talk to you about if we call you for interview. And that's one of the reasons why it's critically important that you write with integrity, that you write as yourself, that you tell the truth, that you don't pretend to be somebody who you're not. Now, why would you do that? Because people can feel under pressure to be this all-singing, all-dancing person, saying really grand things about themselves as a passionate and committed future student. And you don't need to do that. And if you do that, in some ways it can fall flat, it can ring untrue. It's not the sort of thing that we need to see, and it doesn't tell us very much about you. If you say, as somebody did a few years ago, that every day you uncover new historical truth, well, age 17 and a half in school, clearly you're not doing that. It might tell us about your ambition, but it doesn't really tell us much about you. Fortunately, we're not cruel, so we're not going to say to somebody at interview, so young man, tell us about the historical truths that you uncovered this morning on your way here in the back of your dad's car. I'm not going to do that. But if instead you've told us about what you've been reading and what you've been thinking about and your views, that gives us something much more tangible and convincing to run with at interview. And that's really what I want to talk to you about here in relation to personal statements, is how you explore and develop those views, form perspectives and communicate them to us so we get a sense of the real you. And you can only do that effectively if it's about you, if it's about your relationship with your subject. And the relationship with the subject is really important because actually without that relationship, the subject doesn't really exist. It doesn't matter what the subject is, this is true. I mean, let's use history, which is my subject, as an example. The past is fixed and dead. It's not going to change. The thing that turns the past into history is what we think about it. And because we're all individuals with individual perspectives, looking at history, looking at the past from a different point of view, with different personal experience to bring to the analysis, in different geographies, in different times, in different cultures, what we will see in history is something slightly different. So the thing that generates the dynamism in the subject is your interaction with it. It's why you're so important to us when we're recruiting. This is the future of the world. It's the future of every dimension of human endeavour. So we need the best people who have the best ideas, who are most committed, who have the greatest insight, and who can bring a range of perspectives. As I say, the past is fixed. It's not going to change, but our perspective will. You will see different things from me, and in some cases you will see more convincing and better things than me. So that's what we want to see in your personal statement. We want to see your mind at work. You will produce something genuinely personal and unique if you explore and you think and you reflect and you talk about that in your personal statement. Whereas if you go on the internet and cull from the internet quotes about the nature of your subject and how important it is and whack those in your personal statement, you're going to say the same things as everybody else, because that's how internet search engines work, fairly obviously. You Google quotes about history, you're all going to get the same stuff. So you could do that. It might inspire you, it might get you thinking, but what's much more likely to produce something unique and interesting is wider exploration done from the heart. So when you come to write your personal statement, you spend the first 75% of it, it's about a side of A4, I would suggest, on your subject of proposed study at university. Talk about how you got interested in your course. You might talk about relevant subjects that you've studied at school or college, and how those have fed into your subject choice for university. And most importantly, you need to do what I'm calling here supercurricular exploration, which is a kind of fancy way of saying, for most arts and humanities subjects, wider reading. In the sciences, it can also involve wider reading. Then in the sciences, it may also involve wider exploration of other sorts. In mathematics, for example, simply doing more maths problems of a more creative and stretching nature. But in many subjects, it's reading which is at the core of this wider exploration, or analogues of reading, watching really good documentaries on the TV, or listening to them on the radio, or watching lectures, TED Talks, the like, through MOOCs on the internet. But ways of getting stimulus. Reading, though, tends to be the best way. It's the thing that gets you thinking hardest, it gets you reflecting the most, it allows you to dive deepest. So you should explore your subject by finding some areas of it that you think are interesting, getting some books, maybe with advice from teachers, or just kind of, going to a bookshop, having a look at what's on the shelves, having a look at some book reviews, pick some stuff out, have a deep dive, think about it, reflect on it, and talk about that in your personal statement. I'm very interested in this thing, and especially this dimension. So I went and got this book and that book, and I read them, and this is what I thought. I thought the first book was really compelling because of the way that it used evidence, the way that it argued about X and Y. The second book, still interesting, but there was a dimension of it that I was much less convinced by for this reason and this reason. Here's somebody who's really interested in the subject. Here's somebody who can talk about the subject, and here's something that we can talk to you about at interview if we call you for interview. So that wider exploration is really important. It shows your interest, but it also enables you to build knowledge and understanding, especially if you're really analytical and reflective about what you're reading. It's not just about reading and having a list, it's about engaging with the material, helping grow the subject and talking about that. Now, what about extracurriculars? I said 75% on subject matter, that's about right. Maybe 25% on non-subject related stuff. It doesn't figure in our considerations here in Cambridge, and if you were in Oxford, they'd say something very similar. And there are other universities where it's not a factor, but in many universities it is, and that's why it needs to be there. You write, by the way, one personal statement for all 5 of your university choices. So it's a bit of a one-size-fits-all job. And because some universities do focus upon extracurricular activities, it should probably be in there. Should it be a factor in decision-making? Well, I think it's for other universities to make a judgment on how they use it and why they use it. The reason we don't factor it in here in Cambridge is because it's not relevant to our core academic business. Of course, we want people, in many cases, to have a normal life, to do stuff outside work. I said earlier that you work very hard here. If you come, you will. But you'll also have lots of time for having a normal student life too. There are 24 hours in a day, 8 hours work, 8 hours sleep, 8 hours other stuff. You won't spend 8 hours asleep as an undergraduate at university. It'll be maybe 5 or 6. You'll be really tired when you go home at the end of term. You'll sleep for a fortnight. But while you're here, you'll be doing normal student stuff alongside working really hard. So that's great. We like that. But as I said earlier, there will be people who just don't have that, who aren't that way, who haven't had the social opportunity to do things like learning the cello or Duke of Edinburgh or whatever it might be. And it would be wrong for us, in my judgment, to place any emphasis upon that when we select. So there's your personal statement.